Hey guys, excuse the fan. It's boiling hot in this room. And you're probably thinking like, it's so cold. Oh, it's like the Arctic in there. It's not like the Arctic. We actually have some of the hottest summers ever. But, oh, who am I kidding? We're in mid-spring, not summer, at the time of recording this video. But anyways, welcome to my read-aloud of Captain Underpants Book 9. Which is not this one. But, Captain Underpants and the Terrifying Return of Timmy Tinkle Trousers. The 9th epic novel by Dave Pilkey. Now, before I start, this book is super big compared to the other books. So, let's just start. Hi everybody, the last time you saw us, we were headed to jail for the rest of our lives. Then something even worse happened. Check out this comic book to get caught up on our story so far. The Super Top Secret Truth About Captain Underpants by George and Harold. Once upon a while ago, there were two good kids named George and Harold. We the Bob Pops, me too. They didn't really Mr. Program, Mr. Crop, blah 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 and stuff. So they came to advise him. You're best. Oh, you know Captain Underpants. Groovy. Mr. Crop thought he really was Captain Underpants. And he got lots of trouble. One time, Dr. Diaper kidnapped him. And George and Harold had to save him. Booyah! Bye-bye! I'm free, rats! Another time, he almost got ate up by some talking toads. Yup, 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 yup. And George and Harold had to save him again. Eat this! I'm a hero! And then this other time, a bunch of zombie nerds attacked. Captain Underpants drank some superpower juice, and he got superpowers. Then he saved George and Harold. It's about time! Here's the worst part. Whenever Mr. Krabby somebody set their fingers, blah, 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 snap, he turns into Captain Underpants. Oh, no! And whenever Captain Underpants sees water in head, splash, it turns back into Mr. Krabs, blah, blah, blah. So whatever you do, don't have your fingers at Mr. Krabs. Seriously, dudes, X-nail on the napping site. Pick one. And if you ever see Captain Underpants saving the world, hide the H2O. Bow! Quick! Nobody pour water on his head! Chapter 1, George and Harold. This is George being Harold. George is the kennel appetite thoughts of Harold's the one who teaches him. Hold on. This is George being Harold. George is the kid on the right with the time thoughts of Harold is the one on the left with t-shirt with the bad haircut. Remember that now. I still don't get why they would put George on the right instead of the left and Harold put on the left instead of the right. Weird. Anyway. When our last adventure ended, George and Harold were being escorted to jail. The police had discovered surveillance photos showing the two boys robbing a bank with Captain Underpants. Of course, we all know that George, Harold, and Captain Underpants were innocent. It was their evil twins who had robbed that bank. But the police hadn't bothered to read the last book, so they probably didn't know what was going on. All they knew was that George and Harold looked a lot like the two kids in the surveillance photos. So the cops yelled, "Freeze!" and grabbed George and Harold and told the two boys of their terrible fate. Suddenly, a gigantic pair of robotic pants appeared from out of nowhere. The terrifying Timmy Tinkle Trousers emerged from the zipper, zapped the cops with an ice ray, and chased George and Harold and their two pets, Crackers and Sulu, far into the cavernous depths of the lower right-hand corner of page 17. If you read our last epic novel, you know that this is how the story ended. But that's not how it's supposed to end. You see, Timmy and his giant ice ray zapping robotic trousers weren't supposed to be there at all. They had come from the future and rudely interrupted what was supposed to happen. Unfortunately for Timmy, that simple act of setting himself backward through time would end up being a terrible, terrible mistake. A mistake that would ultimately lead to the destruction of our entire planet, more or less. But before I tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2, The Banana Cream Pie Paradox. Now, before I actually start reading, I want to address you. The Banana Cream Paradox is actually the same. Well, actually, it's not, but it's the same idea as the Grandfather Paradox. If you know what that is, how? But actually, just look about it, read about it. Come on, do some reading. Don't just sit down and watch my YouTube videos. Actually, do some reading like I'm doing right now. Anyway. Time machines are awesome. There's no doubt about it. But they can also be very dangerous. It's possible that a person could go back in time and accidentally change one little thing. And that one teeny itty bitty thing could profoundly affect the future. This is what scientists refer to as the Banana Cream Pie Paradox. Please follow along these handy illustrations. Imagine, if you will, that scientists from the year 2020... 2020 was 6 years ago. Holy crap. Baked a banana cream pie using bananas they harvested from his very own banana tree. Hopefully you don't get COVID on that. Anyway, let's suppose now that the scientists took his banana cream pie into a time machine, we zapped him and the pie back to the year 1936. Disclaimer, if you're gonna write in the comments saying, "Oh, he said the C-R-A-P word, unsubscribe," like seriously, they talk about pooping here all the time. Whatever. Now, imagine that the scientist stepped out of his time machine and accidentally trips smashing his pie into the face of a lady sitting at a fancy garden party. Let's suppose the lady jumped up angrily, wiped a handful of gooey banana cream pie filling from her face, and threw it at the scientist. The scientist ducked, causing banana goo to smack into the face of a gentleman standing nearby. A waitress pointed at the gentleman left. The angry gentleman wiped the goo off his face. The angry gentleman wiped the goo from his face and smooshed it into the waitress's face. "Well," said the waitress, "I never been so insulted in all my life. You're gonna get out more light," said said a wise guy. "Why don't you mind your own business, bird brain?" said another man as he poked the wise guy in the eyes. The wise guy fell backward and landed on the scientist's banana tree, which is just a tiny sapling in 1936. The tiny banana tree snapped in half and died. Now, if the scientist's banana tree died in 1936, it could never grow up and produce bananas. Therefore, the scientist would not have had the main ingredients he used to make his banana cream pie in the year 2020. Consequently, the banana cream pie could not exist. Tell that to these guys! Many scientists throughout the centuries have pondered the banana cream pie paradox, or grandfather paradox, and have come to the conclusion that people should be really, 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 really careful when they use time machines, because one simple change in the past could affect the future, and even possibly destroy our entire planet. End of public service announcement. Now on to the real story. Back into the real story. Chapter 3. The real ending of our last adventure. As we already saw in Chapter 1, George and Harold were being taken to jail when Timmy Tinkercharge traveled backward through time and interfered. But what would have happened if he hadn't showed up? What was supposed to happen before Timmy so rudely interrupted them? Well, we'll sit back and get comfortable, because you're about to find out. The police chief and his right-hand man, Officer McWiggly, handcuffed George and Harold, shoveled them to the back of their police car. "You've got the wrong guys!" cried Harold. "We didn't rob that bank!" "It's true," said George. "That bank was robbed by your evil twins from an alternate universe." "You're right," said Officer McWiggly. "If I had a nickel for every time I heard that excuse." On the way to jail, the cops drove past Mr. Krupp, who was busy cleaning up the soggy toilet paper in his yard. Remember the last book? Anyway. "Hey!" shouted the police chief. "That's the guy who robbed the bank with those kids! Let's get him!" yelled Officer McWiggly. The cops slammed on the brakes, grabbed Mr. Krupp, handcuffed him, and threw him into the backseat of the car along with George and Harold. Their trials lasted for nearly a year, and George and Harold and Mr. Krupp were all found guilty. They were each sentenced to 10 years of incarceration. This unusually harsh sentence was tough on George and Harold, but it was really hard on Mr. Krupp. Now, let's look at what the newspaper says. The trial of the century ended today with a guilty verdict of Judge Fudgy McGrudge. Miami County resident Benjamin Krupp was sentenced to 10 years at Piqua State Penitentiary for masterminding the robbery of Frank's Bank in Piqua nearly 1 year ago. Two juveniles, George Beard and Harold, both residents of Piqua, were also sentenced to 10 years in the Piqua Juvenile Detention Center for their roles in the robbery. Although all the stolen money was recovered on the day of the robbery, Judge Fudgy McGrudge decided to make an example of the former elementary school principal and his two students for being a big meanie. When asked to comment on the unusually harsh sentence, George Beard, age 10 and 3/4, was reported to have said, "Oh man!" George's youthful accomplice, Harold Hudgens, age 11, further expounded on the pair's reaction to the verdict by adding, "No fair!" This guilty verdict ended the sensational scandal that stunned the world, received massive coverage in all the news outlets, and interrupted the narrative flow of this book with a poorly drawn newspaper that contained a bunch of really tiny words that I'm reading right now. Anyway, Dr. Kent Seed, too good, president of Doctors United Movement to banish tiny words in the story, Dumb Twits, warned that illustrations containing small words can cause eye strain, which can lead to headaches, nausea, and ridiculous acronyms. It can also lead to not being able to focus all the time because the sun's getting in and out because the clouds moving outside. Anyway, throughout the trial, many witnesses were called to testify against the defendants, including fellow classmate Melvin Sneevely. Melvin gave many long, supportively detailed accounts of alleged irresponsible and disrespectful to him behavior by the two young defendants. He concluded his incendiary 3-day testimonial by sticking out his tongue at Mr. Beard and Mr. Hudgens and singing the popular playground taunt, "Nya, nya, 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 nya." Other witnesses against the defendants included Piqua State Penitentiary inmate Dr. Diaper, former science teacher and current resident of the Piqua Home for the Reality Challenge, Mr. Mortified, and a small group of parents from Connecticut, North Dakota, California, Texas, continued on pages 2 through 49. Thank God we don't have to read that whole newspaper, because, oh boy. Back to the real story again. Chapter 4, Life in the Big House. Poor Mr. Krupp. He had been locked up at the Piqua State Penitentiary for months, and the life of a jailbird just wasn't his thing. All day long, he had people bossing him around. He ate nutritionally deficient, horrible-tasting meals in a filthy cafeteria. He got harassed constantly by a bunch of meat-headed bullies, and he spent his days doing menial busy work in an overcrowded, poorly ventilated sweatshop. Mr. Krupp was told when to eat, when to read, and when to exercise. He even had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. He was constantly bombarded with pointless rules, ridiculous discipline, random searches, metal detectors, security cameras, and pharmaceuticals designed to make everyone compliant and docile. It was a lot like being a student at Drumhorse Elementary School, except that the prison had better funding. Mr. Crab grumbled angrily to himself as he stomped around the prison courtyard on a gloomy autumn afternoon. In the center of the courtyard, a giant green tarp shielded everyone's eyes from something large and tall that was being built in honor of the Pico State Penitentiary's upcoming 10-year anniversary. Everyone assumed it was some kind of statue, but since nobody had seen this top-secret project, not even the warden, nobody was quite sure what it was. But you'll find out soon enough, rest assured. I'm sick of this place, Mr. Crop muttered to himself. Everybody's always told me what to do. If one more person gives me another order, I think I'm gonna go crazy. Hey, you! Shouted a tiny inmate working behind the green tarp. Give me the header over there! Mr. Crump clenched his fist furiously. You can't tell me what to do! He screamed. You're a prisoner just like I am! I most certainly am nothing like you! Said the tiny prisoner. It was Tibby Tinkletrousers, who was serving an 8-year sentence for attempting to take over the planet with intent to enslave humanity. Mr. Crump rolled up his sweaty sleeves and stomped over to the pint-sized prisoner. He eyed Tibby up and down. Tibby eyed Mr. Crump down and up. Hey! Mr. Crump shouted. You look kind of familiar. I agree, said Tibby. But I can't quite remember when I've seen you before. The two men walked in slow circles around each other. Well, whoever you are, Mr. Crump said, you got no business bossing me around. I'll let you know, said Tibby, that I'm more than just a regular prisoner. I'm an artiste. I was handpicked to build a statue by Warden Schmorden. Suddenly, a rotund little man peeked his bulbous dandruff-speckled head out from behind the green tarp. Did somebody just say my name? He asked excitedly. It was Warden Goran B. Schmorden, the guardian and chief jailer of Pico State Penitentiary. Warden Schmorden was known far and wide for his cruelty and strictness. He once sentenced a prisoner to a year of solitary confinement just for ending a sentence with a preposition. Warden Schmorden was undoubtedly the most maniacally evil person anyone had ever met, but the injurious jailer had one fatal weakness. He was easily flattered. And that weakness was exactly what Tibby Tinkletrousers used to talk his way into making a giant statue of Warren Goran Born Schmorden to commemorate the 10-year anniversary of the Pico State Penitentiary. Just leave everything to me, said Tibby at the start of the project, and I'll construct the most stunningly handsome statue you've ever seen. Really? Said the warden. Can you make it extra tall and extra handsome? Of course, said Tibby. Wonderful, wonderful, cried Warden Schmorden. How soon can you get started? As soon as I get my supplies, said Tibby. He handed the warden a carefully written list of tools and materials. Hey, Warden Schmorden, looking over the list. Why do most of these supplies come from the Mad Scientist mini-mall? What do you need an emulsifying salsa flange inhibitor for? And what kind of a statue uses a reverse symbobulating tractum refractionalizer? You know, said Tibby. I don't tell you how to run your prison, so don't tell me how to build my statues. Fair enough, said Warden Schmorden. Chapter 5, The Unveiling. One brisk evening in late October, the entire prison was yawning with excitement. The prisoners had all gathered in the bleachers under a clear moonlit sky as the prison band played a slow, reverent, and deeply moving rendition of Whomp, There It Is. After everyone dried their eyes, Warren Borsward stepped onto the stage to congratulate himself. He proudly bragged about his great humility, confessed his intense hatred of intolerant people, and spoke for hours about his legendary brevity. Then the moment of truth arrived. Tibby Tinkletrousers' statue was finally ready to be shown to the world. With great theatrical flair, Tibby proudly strutted out to the courtyard and grabbed hold of the giant green tarp. Gentlemen and gentlemen, he announced, it gives me great pleasure to get the heck out of here! Tibby pulled on the tarp and revealed his creation. Hey! Said Warren Borsward. The statue doesn't have a head! It's not the statue, yelled Tibby as he climbed a tall ladder up to the cockpit on top. It's a giant robo-suit, and after I escape from this horrible prison, I'm gonna put an end to that nonsensical nuisance, Captain Underpants! Tibby wiggled into the tiny cockpit and started up the engines. Suddenly, the colossal contraption came to life. Its mighty chest heaved, its gigantic gorilla-like arms swayed threateningly. Sound the alarms! Screamed Warden Schmorden. Stop that guy! Armed guards ran in every direction while sirens wailed and prisoners screamed for their lives. Massive searchlights swept across the sky as the metallic behemoth took its first thunderous steps toward freedom. Suddenly, Tibby stopped and thought for a moment. Hey, I know where I saw that guy before, Tibby said. Tibby searched the crowd of panicky prisoners until he found the one he was looking for. The giant head of Tibby's robosuit reached out and plucked Mr. Croft from the crowd. I knew I'd recognize you from somewhere, said Tibby. You're the principal of that school I shrank last year. Oh, yeah, said Mr. Crump. I remember you now. You're that Professor Poopy Pants guy. My name is not Professor Poopy Pants, screamed the angry villain. That was a ridiculous name, so I changed it to Tibby Tinkletrousers. Gee, that's a lot better, said Mr. Crump sarcastically. Tibby glared into Mr. Crump's defiant eyes. I shall ignore your impudence on one condition, Tibby said. Tell me where I can find George Beard and Hare Hutchins. George and Harold? Asked Mr. Crump as he dangled precariously from Timmy's giant robotic fingertips. What do you want with those two? Those boys have something to do with Captain Underpants and Timmy. I've seen them all together. They know each other. I'm sure of it. Well, they should be pretty easy to find, said Mr. Crump. They're both locked up at the Piqua Juvenile Detention Center. They're in juvie, yeah? Said Timmy with a sinister smirk. Then that's where we're gonna go. Timmy clutched Mr. Crump tightly in his robotic fist as he stomped forward, crushing through the armored watchtower and smashing through cell block B. Freeze or we'll shoot! Shouted the guards. How about if I shoot, then you'll freeze! Said Timmy as he pressed him on his control panel, causing a giant door in the chest of his robosuit to swing open. A massive laser shooter poked out from the mechanical desk of the robosuit and zapped the armed guards. Suddenly they were transformed into frozen statues. What do you just do? Screamed Mr. Crump hysterically. Oh, relax, said Timmy. It's just my freezing B4000. It temporarily freezes whatever it zaps for as long as I choose. Those guards will thaw out in about 10 minutes, and they'll be perfectly fine. Timmy's heaving mechanical monstrosity thundered through the prison parking lot, battering buses and crushing cars as they headed toward the Piqua Juvenile Detention Center. I just don't get it, said Mr. Crump. What's so important about Captain Underpants? That ridiculous superhero flung my plot to take over the planet and enslave humanity, shouted Timmy. He's the reason I got locked up. Everybody knows that, said Mr. Crump. But what's going to stop him from defeating you again? Oh, don't you worry your sweaty little head about that, said Timmy. I got the few tricks on my sleeve this time. Chapter 6, Calling Captain Underpants. Meanwhile, across town at the Piqua Juvenile Detention Center, George and Hal were getting ready for bed. You know, said George, I don't really mind being stuck here in juvie. Yeah, said Harold. It's not much different from our old school, except they have library books here, and a music teacher, said George, and an art teacher, said Harold. As the two boys discussed the similarities between the elementary school and forced confinement in a harsh, authoritarian penal, whatever, institute, they heard the sounds of booming footsteps getting louder and louder. Soon their entire building began to shake violently with each thundering stride. George and Harold dashed to their windows and saw Timmy's terrifying robo-suit stomping toward them, freezing anyone and everything that stood in its way. Oh no! Screamed Hal. We're doomed! Timmy stopped at the main entrance to the center and demanded to speak with whoever was in charge. After a few minutes, the center's administrator, Director Hector Schmechter, what's up with these rhyming names? Whatever. Shut up nervously at the door. Said Director Schmechter, may I help you? Do you have two kids in their name? George Beard and Hal Hutchins? Shouted Timmy. Yeah, said Director Schmechter. Those two kids are nothing but trouble. They're always pulling pranks, too. I mean, you can't sit on the toilet around here without getting ketchup spraying your underwear. And last week, they just on the moment! Timmy interrupted. Hey, no problem, Director Schmechter chuckled, trying to sound cool. Director Hector Schmechter pranced excitedly to George and Hal's cell, grabbed them by the arms, and escorted them to the front door. This'll teach you for putting hair remover in my shampoo, said Director Schmechter. Hector tossed the boys outside and locked the door. George and Hal stood trembling before Timmy's massive robo-suit as the crazed inventor chuckled menacingly. Hello, George and Hal, crowed Timmy. Remember me? The boys were too frightened to speak. Hey, Timmy, said Mr. Crump. You don't need me anymore, do you? I mean, I told you where you could find the brass, right? You can let me go now, right? I guess so, said Timmy. He set Mr. Crump down on the ground by George and Hal. Ha! Mr. Crump laughed. I never thought of me having to see you two kids again. You both are in big trouble now. And without thinking, George and Hal reached out their hands and snapped their fingers. Snap, snap! Suddenly, a ridiculously optimistic smile spread across Mr. Crump's face. Hey! Cried Timmy. What's going on down here? What George and Hal knew, and what Timmy was about to discover, was that Mr. Crump was transformed into the world's greatest superhero, Captain Underpants. Quickly, he wiggled out of his purple prison jumpsuit, flipped his shoes away, and peeled off his sweaty toupee. The only thing missing was his cape. He looked around the detention center, but couldn't find anything suitable. I can't be a superhero without a cape, said Captain Underpants. You okay? George assured him. Yeah, said Harold. You don't need a cape, seriously. Sorry, said the captain, but you gotta look fine if you're gonna fight crime. And with no time to spare, Captain Underpants flew off to find a cape. Set! That guy was Captain Underpants! Cried Tippy. Doi! Said George. Ah! Screamed Tippy. Again, George responded with the only intelligent word that could possibly be applied in such a situation. Doi! Meanwhile, Captain Underpants had flown to a nearby shopping center, which was having its semi-annual lazy storytelling sale. Quick! Cried Captain Underpants. Do you guys still superhero capes? You betcha, said the employee cheerfully. They're in aisle 39 between the diaries and the wizard hats. Awesome, cried Captain Underpants. In no time at all, our hero found a cape tied around his neck and flew off into the night to face his mortal enemy. Chapter 7, Tippy's Trouser Troubles. Meanwhile, back at the Piqua Juvenile Detention Center, Tippy Tickle Trousers was in a tizzy. He grabbed George and Harold in his mighty robotic hands and demanded some answers. "Tell me everything you know about Captain Underpants," screamed Tippy, "or I'll squish you kids like a couple of blueberries." "Well," said George, "he's really strong." "And," said Harold, "he's really powerful." Yes, said Tippy. "What else is he?" "He's right behind you," said George and Harold simultaneously. Tippy turned quickly, but not quickly enough. Captain Underpants swung his flabby fist and bashed Tippy right in the jaw. Pow! The force of the blow sent Tippy's robo-suit flying over the top of the juvenile detention center into one of the Pequot's many downtown skyscrapers. George and Harold flew from the grip of Tippy's robo-fist and landed safely into nearby bushes. "I'll kill you!" screamed Tippy as he pulled himself up and lunged at Captain Underpants. The chest panel of the robo-suit flipped over in a brilliant burst of energy from the freezing beam 4000 shot out of the waistband warrior. But Captain Underpants was too quick. He zipped and zinged, expertly avoiding every frozen energy beam that burst from the belly of the beastly robo-suit. "Oh, Tippy!" cried Captain Underpants. He sat coyly on top of a nearby skyscraper. "I'm up here!" Tippy turned quickly and zapped his freezing beam 4000 skyscraper, covering it with a thick case of ice. Captain Underpants had been too fast. He had zinged away just in time. Captain Underpants flew several blocks away to the swing set of the playground of Jerome Hort's elementary school. Robo-Tippy ran after him. "Yo-ho-ho, Tippy Tip!" Captain Underpants sang as he swung playfully from his swing. "Will you give me a push?" Tippy leaped over the school and landed at the football field. He zapped his freezing beam 4000 again, this time covering the swing set with a thick coating of ice. But again, Captain Underpants had zanged away just in time. "Here, Tippy!" he called Captain Underpants again as he launched lazily between Tippy's giant robotic feet. "I'm down here now! Can I have some ice, please?" screamed Tippy as he bent over and zapped the freezing beam 4000 down between his feet. Of course, Captain Underpants was long gone before the ice beam had reached the ground. Unfortunately for Tippy, however, his robo-feet weren't. Tippy's giant robo-feet and robo-legs were now encased in a huge shimmering iceberg. He pulled with all his might, but his whole lower half was frozen to the football field. Tippy was stuck. Chapter 8. Break into Electric Boogaloo. "Ah!" screamed Tippy. He ducked his head beneath the cockpit of the robo-suit and disappeared down the stairwell into the intricate innards of its intimidating invention. Again, what the hell is with these alliterations? In Captain Underpants books. I mean, really. They're also in the titles. Anyway, Captain Underpants grabbed the arms of the robo-suit and began to pull. Harder and harder he tugged until, one by one, the rivets of the robo-suit's thick steel belt began to pop. The harder Captain Underpants yanked, the more the robo-suit began to break in two. The shrieking sounds of twisty metal reverberated around Tippy as he traversed the crumbling staircase. His only chance was to make it down to the lower half of the robo-suit before Captain Underpants pulled it apart. Clank! With no time to spare, Tippy dashed into the robo-pants just as the robo-suit broke in two. "You haven't seen the last of me!" Tippy yelled as he closed the emergency hatch on the robo-pants. Then Tippy sent his Tickle Time Travelometer to 5 years ago and pressed the away we go button. Suddenly, sparks of blue lighting began emanating from the robo-pants. The more bolts cracked loudly and grew more and more intense until finally Tippy and his robo-pants were jumped in a gigantic ball of blue lightning. A blinding flash turned the night sky to day for a sliver of a second, and then it was all over. Tippy and his robo-pants had disappeared, leaving only an empty mound of ice behind. The crazed inventor and his terrifying chargers would never be seen again after that night. They would, however, be seen exactly 5 years before that night. But before I can tell you that story, we have to go back even further. Chapter 9. Exactly 5 years, 11 days, 14 hours, and 6 minutes ago. This is Harold Hutchins. Harold is 6 years old, and he lives with his mom and sister at 1520 Vine Street in Pequot, Ohio. Harold's parents had just gone divorced, and his dad moved to Nevada about 6 months ago. None of this had been easy for Harold. He didn't talk about it. In fact, Harold Hutchins didn't talk much at all. He kept to himself mostly and drew pictures, lots and lots of pictures. Harold liked to draw monsters and superheroes. The monsters he created were evil and ferocious, and the superheroes were always virtuous and brave. They were never far away when you needed them. Harold loved getting lost in his wonderful paper and pencil adventures where the good guys always won and the bad guys always ended up getting the kick in the pants that they deserved. Today had started out just like any ordinary school day. Harold got dressed and ate his breakfast, trying hard not to think about the tough day that lay ahead of him. Harold was in kindergarten at Jerome Hort's elementary school, and he hated every minute of it. His teacher was mean, the bullies were jerks, and the principal was just plain evil. The best Harold could do was try to fit in and not draw any unnecessary attention to himself. He brushed his teeth and carefully placed his pencils and his favorite drawings into his backpack, unaware that today was going to be a day that would change his life forever. Harold's mom helped him put his backpack on at the front door. "Maybe you'll make a friend at school today," she said cheerfully. "Nah," said Harold, emotionless. "I don't think so." "What about that little boy next door who moved in last weekend?" said Harold's mom. "What's his name?" Harold shrugged. He had seen the boy once or twice, but they hadn't actually met. Maybe you should go over and introduce yourself, said Harold's mom. Wouldn't it be nice to have a friend who lives next door? Harold shrugged again. Harold's mom hugged him and kissed the top of his head. She got $2 out of her purse and handed them to Harold. This is for your lunch, okay, honey? She said, I don't want you using this money at the candy machine or the pop machine. I won't, said Harold. That much was true. Harold knew his lunch money would never make it to the candy machine or the pop machine. Harold's $2 usually never even made it into the school. They were always taken away from him by a 6th grade boy named Kipper. Kipper Krupp was the biggest and meanest kid at Drumheart's elementary school. He was the captain of the wrestling team and the nephew of the school principal, so everybody treated him like royalty. Kipper's 3 creepy friends, Loogie, Bug, and Thinkstein, also got special treatment, and they all paraded up and down the school hallways like they owned the place. Every day, Kipper and his 3 friends stole lunch money from the kindergartners. Most of the kids just handed it over without question. It was a lot less trouble and much less painful than getting a wedgie or a punch in the stomach. Kipper Krupp loved to terrorize kindergartners, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. If Kipper ever got into a jam, all he had to do was call on his uncle, Principal Krupp. Uncle Benny! Kipper would cry. That kindergartner just hit my fist with her stomach! Oh, she did she? Mr. Krupp would yell, turning to the small child writhing in pain on the floor. How dare you hurt my nephew's fist! Mr. Krupp had a zero-tolerance policy in place at Drumheart's elementary school, and he was very strict about it. He had once suspended a 3rd grader just for saying the word gun. To be honest, the boy had actually said the word gum, but it sounded a lot like gun. And there was no room for common sense when it came to zero tolerance. Harold knew from experience that the wisest thing to do was stay out of Kipper's way, so his daily walk to school became more like an obstacle course. He quickly ran in spurts, dashing from trash can to mailbox to tree, hiding behind everything he could find, just in case Kipper and his friends were nearby. The worst section of Harold's mad dash to school was the intersection of Dogwood Drive and Rosita Lane. Now, Rosita kind of sounds familiar. Anyway, there was nowhere to hide between the big tree and by the coffee shop and the sign at the gas station across the street. He just had to wait for the walk signal, run for it, and hope for the best. Most days, Harold was lucky, but his luck was about to run out. Harold crouched quietly behind the coffee shop tree, watching the traffic lights, concentrating on the cars, and looking out for Kipper. It was very stressful. After a couple of minutes, the cars came to a stop and the walk signal lit up, and Harold took one last glance left and right. It was now or never. He jumped up and ran out across the street as fast as he could go. When he reached the other side of the street, Harold lay behind the display sign in front of the gas station. He had made it. He was safe. Or so he thought. Hey, stupid kid! Shouted Billy Bill, the owner of the gas station. Get away from that sign! Harold's heart was pounding in his throat as Billy Bill stomped toward him and grabbed the back of his t-shirt. He yanked Harold out from behind the sign, making a terrible scene. That sign is a valuable piece of merchandise! Billy Bill screamed. No toy for you to play with! I'm sorry! Harold whispered frantically, trying to pull away, but it was too late. Billy Bill's loud shouting had caught the attention of Kipper Krupp and his 3 creepy companions. The 4 bullies strutted across the street toward Harold. Hey, kid! Yelled Kipper. Why are you bothering this nice man? I'm sorry, Harold said again, looking down. Billy Bill released Harold with a shove, causing him to fall to the ground. You boys better take care of your little friend there, Billy Bill said, or I'm gonna call the cops on him. Don't worry, mister, said Kipper with an evil grin. We'll take good care of him. Kipper yanked Harold up his arm while Loogie pulled Harold's backpack open and started rummaging through it. Hey, look, I found his lunch money, said Loogie. Give me it, yelled Kipper. Loogie dutifully put the money to Kipper's moist, dirty hand. None of this behavior appeared to disturb Billy Bill at all. In fact, he seemed to enjoy watching it. You gotta learn to stick up for yourself, boy, Billy Bill said to Harold, chuckling, or people are gonna bully you your whole life. But you are bullying him. But the 4 fiends dragged Harold across the street toward the school parking lot. Harold's luck was running out, but fortunately, as we all know, luck has a way of changing, and Harold's bad luck was about to change in a very big way. Chapter 10. Meet George. This is George Beard. George is 5 3/4 years old. He and his parents had just moved from Michigan into the house next door to Harold and his family. George was what adults like to call a precocious child. His mother had taught him to read and write when he was 4 years old, and he currently scored higher on tests than most children twice his age. George's former teachers had suggested that he skip ahead to the 3rd grade, but his parents decided it would be better if George stayed in the classroom with kids his own age. To this day, George's parents were still not sure if they had made the right decision. On one hand, George had developed good social skills and had been well liked by his classmates. That was good. On the other hand, George was born in class and often got into mischief. That was bad. George had never really liked school very much. He preferred riding a skateboard, watching monster movies, and reading comics and graphic novels. George liked writing stories too. He had filled up more than 20 spiral notebooks with marvelously silly adventure stories that he had written all by himself. Many of George's stories had gotten him into trouble when he read them out loud at his old school, like The Fart That Ate Detroit. His classmates loved them, but his teachers thought they were rude, violent, and totally inappropriate. "I hope things will be better here in Ohio," said George's mother. She helped him get ready for his very first day at classes at Drumhorn Elementary School. "Your father and I bought you this nice tie to wear at school today."
"A tie?"
cried George.
"Kids don't wear ties."
"Well, you're going to wear one," said George's mother. "I want you to make a good first impression."
"Oh, come on, Mom," said George. "Ties are for nerds."
"Oh, for heaven's sake," said George's mom. "Your father wears a tie. Is he a nerd?"
Kind of,"
said George. "Don't be ridiculous," said George's mom. "You're wearing a tie, and that's final." "Rats," said George. George put his bat back on and reluctantly hugged his mom at the door. He was still a little upset about the whole tie thing. "Have a good first day at school, dear," said George's mom. Said George. George grabbed his skateboard from the bushes by the driveway and started up towards school. It was about 5 blocks away, and the sidewalks were mostly smooth with hardly any pebbles. Good for skateboarding. The ride to school had been very pleasant, actually, until George reached the corner of Dogwood Drive and Rosita Lane. Again, Rosita sounds familiar. There was some kind of commotion going on in front of the gas station across the street as George watched it intently as he waited for the traffic light to change. He saw the gas station guy shove a yellow-haired kid to the ground. Then he saw some mean-looking kids yank the boy up and steal his money. This was not good. Finally, the light changed and George walked across the street toward the gas station. He stood by the display sign while the attendant laughed at the yellow-haired kid and told him he needed to learn to stick up for himself. George was furious. Side note, this picture of Harold is so sad yet so cute. I feel so bad for Harold in this book, like he's literally helpless. And the person who should be helping, the adult, is encouraging the behavior. Absolutely reprehensible behavior. But moving right along, Chapter 11, Furious George. There is not a whole lot you can do when you are a little kid who encounters injustice. Your natural desire is to set things right, but that can often backfire, resulting in even greater injustices. The sad truth is, big people usually have all the power. You can't force anybody to be kind or fair or honorable, especially if you're only 43 inches tall and weigh only 50 pounds. That's why it's important to be smart. George Beale had just witnessed the most hostile and unfair thing he had ever seen. The bad guys outnumbered him by 5-1 and outweighed him by probably 700 pounds. But George was smarter than all of them put together, and he knew it. As the bullies dragged Harold across the street, George looked around him for the best way to make things right. He focused in on the display sign next to him. The sign read "Free Brake Inspection." This was a busy intersection, and George knew that a tiny change on this sign would create a great deal of pandemonium, so he reached over to the sign and removed the letters K and E from the word brake. "Hey!" screamed Billy Bill. "You get away from the sign right now, you hear? What is wrong, you kids these days?" Billy Bill marched over to George, yelling and waving his hands in the air frantically. He reached out to grab George by the shirt collar, but he never got the chance. Because at that very moment, a violet Volkswagen jumped up the curve and screeched up next to Billy Bill. 2 old ladies flew out the car, screaming at the top of their lungs.
"Free bra inspection!"
shouted the driver as she smacked Billy Bill over the head with her purse.
"That's offensive! How dare you!"
yelled the other lady, hitting Billy Bill with her cane.
"Women are human beings, not toys for you to play with! You're a male chauvinist pig!"
screamed a third lady who had run over from the coffee shop across the street with a group of her angry female friends. They just took turns kicking Billy Bill repeatedly in the knees as other women drivers slammed on their brakes and rushed forward to join in the ferocious female fight for equality.
"You gotta learn to stick up for yourself,"
George said to Billy Bill, smiling,
"or people are gonna bully your whole life."
You guys saw it right. George just threw Billy Bill's words back in his own face. Especially the women, too. As he's getting beat up. Talk about getting his best desserts. Anyway, George walked past the giant traffic jam that was forming and ignored Billy Bill's tear-filled cries for mercy as the kicking and whacking and hair-pulling and foot-stomping continued. George was looking for that yellow-haired kid. He skated over to the elementary school and circled back toward the parking lot. There he saw Kipper and his creepy cohorts laughing and cheering as they tore up Harold's drawings and snapped each of his pencils in half.
"Leave him alone!"
shouted George. The 6th-grade bullies turned and looked at the tiny kindergartner who stood defiantly before them. "Ha ha ha!" laughed Kipper. "What you gonna do if we don't?"
"I'm gonna idiot Jones you!"
George said as he untied his tie and twirled it threateningly between his outstretched hands. "Get him!" yelled Kipper. The boys ran in for the attack, and George let them have it. Chapter 12, The Choreographed Vosh at the Flipperama, starring Indiana George and the Tie of Doom.
This chapter contains scenes of intense brutalities intended for mature audiences only. For those of us who aren't very mature, we probably introduced the art of Flipperama.
The Kipper Whipper. I said whipper in a funny way. Anyway. Kipper screamed like a giant blubbering baby and ran for his life. Bug and Loogie were up next. The attacker smacked her. Let's get out of here! Screamed Loogie and Bug through their tears. Finkelstein opened up a trash bin, and the four bullies tried to scramble inside, but they weren't fast enough. The tormentor preventer. Chapter 13, The Detention.
I don't want you guys messing with me ever again!
George said firmly as the boy squealed in high-pitched terror.
And that yellow-haired kid is off limits too! You mess with us, you answer to the tie!
George snapped his tie in the air one last time, causing the four sobbing sixth graders to shriek like hyenas. Uncle Benny! Kipper wailed through his tears. Suddenly, Mr. Crump came storming out of the building. What's going on out here? He screamed. That little kid beat us up! Kipper sobbed. Oh, he did he? Yelled Mr. Crump as he grabbed George by his arm. I don't take kindly to bullies in this school!
They're the bullies!
Cried Harold, pointing at Kipper and his three fine friends.
Those guys were just about to beat that kid up. He was just defending himself.
Mr. Crump reached over and grabbed Harold by his arm. I don't like liars either! He growled. Mr. Crump, that jerk. Anyway, Mr. Crump yanked both boys to the detention room. You two troublemakers are going to stay here until you've learned your lesson! He shouted, then slammed the door.
So much for good first impressions,
said George. The two boys sat in silence for several minutes. Harold opened his backpack and took out a notebook at the pointy half of one of his broken pencils. He started to draw.
What grade are you in?
Asked George.
Kindergarten,
said Harold.
Me too,
said George.
I'm new. We just moved here 3 days ago. Oh,
said Harold.
I think you live next door to my house. Really?
said George. George glanced over and noticed that Harold was drawing a giant monster.
Hey, you're a good drawer,
George said.
Thanks,
said Harold. George watched as Harold drew a flying zero, zapping the monster with a laser beam.
Cool,
said George, pointing to the superhero.
What's that guy's name?
Harold shrugged.
He doesn't have a name. How come?
Asked George. Harold shrugged again.
It's just a picture,
he said.
It's not really a story. Oh,
said George. George watched intently as Harold finished his picture. When he was done, Harold folded the page back and started drawing a new picture on the next page.
Do you want to draw too?
Harold asked.
I have some more pencils. They're broken, but the pointy parts still work okay. No,
George said.
I can't draw good. I'm a writer. Oh,
said Harold. He tore some fresh pages out from the back of his notebook and handed them to George.
Here, you can write on these if you want.
George took the papers and thought for a long time. Then he wrote The Adventures of Dogman at the top of the first page. At the bottom, he wrote By George and...
Hey, what's your name, kid?
George asked.
Harold.
Said Harold. George wrote Harold's name down at the bottom.
I'm gonna write a comic book.
Said George.
You can draw the pictures, okay? Okay.
Said Harold. And that is how George and Harold became friends and started their publishing empire on the very same day. That being Chapter 14, The Adventures of Dogman, Action, Laughs, Fleas, by George and Harold. The Adventures of Dogman by George and Harold. One time there was a police guy. His partner was a guy named Greg. They were good at catching criminals and stuff. Oh! But one day there was a bomb. We have to stop the bomb, Greg! But they were too late. Kablooey. The bomb blew up and they got hurt. Then an ambulance took them to the hospital. How do you feel, old friend? Woof! Me too. So the doctor came in with sad news. I'm sorry, Greg, your body's died. Your head has died too, cop. Raz sure hate my dying head. But then, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we sew Greg's head on the cop's body? Good idea, Nurse Lay, you're a genius. Alright. Soon they had a big operation. The doctor cut off Greg's head and sewed it on cop's body. What a lucky day. And so, hooray for Dogman! Dogman was the best of all cops. He could sniff crooks with his dog nose. Rats. He could hear crimes with his dog ears. Rats. And best of all, he could punch criminals with his human fist. Pow! Ow! I mean rats! Quick, Dogman, where's the cook? Roof, roof! He's up on the roof. Where's he going? He's wearing pants. How will he get up there? What? Good idea, Dogman. Let's climb the bark of this tree. And so, we caught the bad guy. We couldn't have done it without you. Dogman was the greatest cop of ever. But he had one mortal fear. Dogman saw the vacuum cleaner. He run and hid. Sorry. Oh, I forgot. Dogs are scared of vacuum cleaners. But nobody knew that somebody was watching. Somebody evil. It was Petey, the world's most evilest cat. Ha ha ha! Now I know Dogman's weakness! So Petey invented an evil vacuum robot. Go, my precious! Go and suck up all the money from the bank! Okay. Ha ha ha! Hey, no fair! Quick, Dogman! A robot is robbing the bank! Dogman ran to save the day. But then, Dogman ran away. I'll get you, Dogman! He run and run. Finally, Dogman got cornered in a corner. Get it? I'll kill you! The vacuum cleaner got closer and closer. Dogman got scareder and scareder. The vacuum leaped tactishly, but then look what happened. Pop! The vacuum got unplugged. Diamond wasn't scared no more. He beat out the robot, pow! And then he followed the cord. It led straight to PD's hideout. Uh-oh. Then PD got arrested. Rats, if only I would have made that cord 6 inches longer. Diamond was the hero. Good boy, dog man. Shake. One. Good idea. Let's have some wine. Non-alcoholic wine, aka grape juice. Hooray for dog man. The end. Chapter 15, The Plan. Mr. Crump's day had been very busy, and he had completely forgotten all about the 2 boys he had banished to the detention room. By the time the final bell rang at 2:45, George and Helen had finished their very first comic book.
Hey, this comic book turned out pretty good,
Said George.
Yep.
Said Harold, smiling.
I bet we can make copies of this and sell them for 25 cents each,
Said George. The 2 boys gathered their things and walked out the front door of the school.
We should start our own comic book company,
Said Harold.
Let's do it.
Said George.
We can call it Treehouse Comics Inc. Why Treehouse?
Asked Harold.
Because my dad's building me a treehouse in our backyard.
Said George.
It's going to have electricity and a TV and everything. We can make our own comic books up there. Awesome!
Said Harold. George and Harold walked by the trash can where Kipper and his friends were just about to administer killer wrenches to a couple of kindergartners.
Oh, Kippy!
Called George. The boys turned and saw George reaching for his tie. Suddenly, their eyes filled with horror. They released their prey and ran away, waving their arms and yipping like wiener dogs.
I think I'm gonna wear a tie every day from now on.
Said George.
I think that's a good idea.
Said Harold. As George and Harold walked home, the 2 friends talked about their favorite movies and games, which videos were the funniest, and what kind of bubblegum blew the best bubbles. Said Harold.
All that talk about bubblegum is making me hungry. Come on over to my house.
Said George.
I make a mean peanut butter and gummy worm sandwich. Really?
Said Harold.
Yep.
George said.
The secret is the chocolate syrup. Okay.
Said Harold. Soon the boys reached George's house and headed for the backyard. George's dad was hard at work building George's new treehouse.
Hi, Pops.
Said George. Hey, buddy. Said George's dad. How was your first day at your new school?
Okay.
Said George. And who's your new friend? And George's dad asked.
This is Harold.
Said George.
He's a good drawer.
Hello, Harold. Said George's dad.
Hi.
Said Harold.
Well, we got a lot of work to do, Pops.
George.
Do you want us to bring you a peanut butter and gummy worm sandwich?
No thank you. Said George's dad. The 2 new friends walked into George's house, made some sandwiches, and got right to work. George and Harold knew it was up to them to put a stop to Kipper Crump's reign of terror, so they made a long list of Kipper's strengths and weaknesses to get a better understanding of their mortal enemy. After a few minutes, Harold began to feel discouraged.
This is terrible.
Said Harold.
Kipper Crump has so many strikes. I can only think of one weakness. What's that?
Asked George.
Well, he's kind of dumb.
Said Harold. George smiled and wrote down kinda dumb under weaknesses.
That's all we need.
Said George. Chapter 16, Super Spice. The next day at school, Harold stuck close to George. The 2 boys spent their every free moment spying on Kipper and gathering as much information as they could about their enemy. They wrote down Kipper's locker number, the type of padlock he used. They took note of Kipper's schedule and paid special attention to what he normally did between classes. They took measurements and even stayed after school to spy on Kipper's wrestling practices. By the end of the week, George and Harold knew Kipper's schedule better than Kipper knew it. Kipper Crumb was a creature of habit. Every day, he did the exact same things at the exact same times. At the end of every school day, Kipper would go to his locker and unlock his heavy-duty padlock with a key he kept on a thick metal chain around his neck. Kipper would place his padlock on top of his locker, then open the locker door. Next, Kipper would empty his pockets, putting his valuables inside the locker. His phone always went on the top shelf, and the money he stole from the kindergartens would always get crammed into a duffel bag at the bottom of the locker. Finally, Kipper would grab his padlock from the top of the locker, put it back on the door, and click it shut to lock it. After wrestling practice, Kipper would go back to his locker and unlock it the very same way. He'd retrieve his phone, grab his heavy-duty padlock from the top of his locker, and put it back on the door. Finally, he'd click it shut to lock everything back up again. Surprisingly, Kipper usually left all his stolen money in his locker every night. Perhaps Kipper thought the money was safest in his locker. Nobody could open that locker without a key. Nobody but Kipper had the key, and Kipper never took the key off of his neck. Not even in the shower.
We'll never get that key away from Kipper,
said Harold as the 2 boys walked up the aisles of the local hardware store.
We don't need the key,
said George.
We just need this.
George picked up a brand new padlock from the home security section.
This is the exact same kind of padlock that Kipper uses on his locker,
said George.
But it won't have the same key,
said Harold.
Each one is a different key.
I know, said George.
So how is that padlock going to help us?
asked Harold.
You'll see,
said Harold, smiling. After the boys paid for their brand new heavy-duty padlock, they went to the toy shop across the street. Down at the end of aisle 3, near the beads and jewelry, George found what he was looking for. A Susie Sunshine friendship bracelet kit.
What is that for?
asked Harold.
We gotta make a couple of friendship bracelets this weekend,
said George.
Why? What for?
said Harold.
You'll see,
said Harold, smiling even more. That weekend, George and Harold spent a lot of time drawing up plans and designing pranks that would help put an end to the bully situation at Drumhorse Elementary School. Then the two boys went through their homes, collecting everything they needed for the job. George found a long roll of shelf lining paper in his kitchen and measured it carefully.
Hey, Mom, can we have this?
Said George.
It's for school.
I suppose so, said George's mom. Harold found some old pants and dress shoes that his dad had left behind when he moved away. He was pretty sure his dad wouldn't mind if they nailed him to George's wooden stilts.
I still don't understand how we're going to hide these stilts in the school,
said George as he practiced walking on them.
You'll see,
said Harold, who knew a few tricks of his own. Now, before I continue, I just want to say, being a kid, I love this moment of the book where these kindergartners are using their absolute limits to defeat the bullets. Like, seriously, no physical action at all, except when George beat him up with his tie.
How did he do that? Look at the size of the tie!
Wait, no, look at that. It's like a few inches, and yeah, we look over here, and it's like, look at it! Like, what the hell? Anyway, chapter 17, Monday. On Monday morning, the boys woke up early, gathered their supplies, and headed to school about 15 minutes before the rest of the students started to arrive. George and Hill carried their stills and the supplies into the boys' restroom upstairs and placed them inside one of the empty stalls. Finally, they closed the stall door and locked it. If you were standing outside the stall, looking underneath the door, it appeared as if somebody was sitting down there taking care of business. George and Hill knew that nobody would dare go near this stall, so it was now the safest place in the school to hide stuff. Soon the students began arriving and the day started pretty much like normal. Mr. Crow marched up and down the hallway screaming and making children cry. Kipper and his creep stole money, distributed wedgies to the kindergartners, and a general feeling of hopelessness and despair filled the morning air. At lunchtime, as usual, the downtrodden kindergartners sat at the table with no food at all. Mr. Krupp stomped up to the kindergarten table and started getting angry. "How come you kids never have any food at lunchtime?" he shouted. Said one kid.
We're on diets.
"Oh," said Mr. Krupp as he pulled his belt over his giant stomach. "Well, good," he said. "It's important to stay fit and healthy, like me." In the afternoon, George Harold asked to be excused so they could use the restroom. They only had about 5 minutes to set things up, so they had to hurry. Harold opened the locker door of their secret restroom stall, and George climbed up the stilts. Quickly, they sneaked down into the hallway. George still walked over to Kipper's locker, and Harold handed him the long spool of shelf-lining paper. Carefully, George placed the paper on top of the lockers and rolled it down to the end. The paper flipped over the edge of the locker tops and rolled down the side. Harold cut it and taped it to the side of the lockers, marking off some measurements with a ruler. Harold put the padlock that he and Harold had bought on the end of the paper 2 lockers down from Kipper's. They were ready. Quickly, they put their supplies back into the restroom stall, locked the door, and hurried back to their classroom. At the end of the day, Kipper walked to his locker as usual. He unlocked his lock with a key hanging around his neck, then put his padlock on top of his locker, right on top of the long roll of paper. George and Harold were standing about 6 lockers away, where Harold had taped the end of the paper to the side of the long row of lockers. Now came the tricky part. As Harold provided cover, quotations, George carefully pulled out the long roll of paper. The paper began to move. Kipper's padlock, which was just above Kipper's head, began to move away from Kipper. George and Harold's padlock, which was 2 lockers away, began moving toward Kipper. Harold had measured everything carefully, so George knew to pull the paper exactly 24 inches. When he was finished pulling, the new padlock was directly above Kipper's locker. Kipper had finished stuffing all of his stolen money into his duffel bag. He put his phone on the top shelf of his locker, closed the door, then reached up and grabbed George and Harold's padlock. Next, he closed the door and clicked the new padlock on securely. "Let's boogie," said Kipper to his buddies, and they strutted to the gymnasium to get ready for wrestling practice.
That was awesome,
said Harold.
"Yep,"
said George.
"But we still got a lot of work to do."
George and Harold waited patiently until almost everybody had gone home. Some kids were still in the gym or outside or in the chess club downstairs, but the hallways and restrooms were empty. George and Harold sneaked over to Kipper's locker, unlocked the padlock, and opened the door, sorry. Harold unzipped Kipper's duffel bag and emptied all the stolen money onto the floor.
"Whoa!"
said Harold.
"There must be $1,000 in here!"
"Well, we'll see about that later." Harold quickly scooped up the stolen cash while George typed on Kipper's phone.
"What are you doing with that phone?"
asked Harold.
"I'm sending a text to Kipper's 3 goons,"
said George. Once the money was safe and the texts were sent, George and Harold put everything back to the way it was, with 2 additions. Harold put the Susie Sunshine Friendship Bracelet kit in Kipper's locker, and George placed an envelope beside Kipper's phone. Finally, George grabbed Kipper's padlock from the top of the lockers, closed the door, and locked it with Kipper's own padlock. Then they had set everything up so it would be ready for tomorrow afternoon.
Let's get out of here.
Harold said nervously.
Just one more thing.
So George, quickly the boys sneaked into the gym locker room and left a second envelope inside one of Kipper's smelly shoes. Then they hurried out of the school and headed for home.
I kind of wish we could stay and watch the fireworks,
Said Harold.
I think it's better if we're not there.
Said George.
Things are about to get ugly.